Good Shabbos. I'd like to take the opportunity this week to address the issue of wearing masks and vaccinations and the ability of a shul or any institution or place of business to limit attendance to those that wear masks or are vaccinated. I'd like to start with a verse in this week's portion which says, Banim atem Hashem Elokeichem. You are children to the Lord your God. You shouldn't cut oneself. And here, the Torah seems to be telling us clearly we're not allowed to do harm to ourselves. And there's other places in the Torah which says, V'nishmartem ma'od l'nafshasechem, you should watch yourself, watch your soul, watch your life very much. And we have other places which tell us that not only are we responsible to make sure that we are healthy and survive, but also that we're responsible for other people. Some rabbis understand the idea of hashavas haved, of returning a lost object, to apply also to returning or helping somebody in the healing process. There's also a verse which says, Lo samod al dam reach, you should not stand by but when the blood of your friend is being spilled. And we have a verse in the Torah which says, Barapo yirape, that you shall heal. And the Talmud learns that from here we see that the Torah gave permission for a doctor to heal, and some would even say that therefore is an obligation because of the other verses that I mentioned before. And we have a general rule that all people are Kol Yisrael arevim zel lezel. All Jews are responsible one for another, and that would go really to extend to all human beings. We're all responsible for the lives of other people and protecting the lives of other people. And here we have a distinction between Western secular medical ethics and Jewish medical ethics. Whereas in the secular ethics, the focus is on rights and autonomy. In Judaism, the focus seems to be on our duties and our obligations. So therefore, in secular law, we don't force someone to heal themselves or to take certain medications. If you want to die, you have the right to die. Suicide, like any form of healing, which is something that you have to take actively, cannot be forced upon you. We have autonomy. In Jewish law, we understand that our lives are not really ours. Really, everything belongs to God. And we are only guardians. In halacha, it's a shomer, somebody who's a watchman. We're only a guardian over that which God has granted us. And he granted us life, and we have an obligation to make sure to keep it and return our soul in the best possible, under the best possible conditions. And as a result, I'm not going to go into detail, but under certain conditions, the halacha, the Jewish law, actually allows a Jewish court, if there are three expert rabbis, to actually force someone to take certain medicines if it's a proven medication, and it will certainly save the life. In practice, this is not necessarily something which we do because we don't always have the court which has the right to do that under law. And also, there's another issue of something which has to be a certain medication that it's certifiably going to work, that there's no doubt as to its efficacy. And therefore, as a result, and under normal conditions, we can't force someone to take a medication, and we can't obligate someone. We can't even say that you are obligated under Jewish law to take a certain medication. So, and therefore, in cases where a person might want to rely on a specific doctor or his own or her own personal feelings that this medication or this surgery or procedure might cause them harm, even though the overwhelming medical opinion of all the expert doctors is that it will help and will save your life, you have the right to say, you know what, I am fearful and I think that this might cause me harm based on my understanding or based on the advice of Dr. So-and-so, and therefore I'm going to refuse to take this medication or to undergo a certain procedure or surgery. And therefore there's an allowance for someone to make their own autonomous decisions, even in Jewish law, because of these particular conditions. That being the case, the question then is it the right thing to do? And that's another issue. In other words, when the person's making his own decision, he's really supposed to make a decision as an obligation to guard his own life and to make sure he's healthy, to make sure they are healthy. If they think they're doing the right thing, I suppose they have the right. It would seem that they have the right. But of course, somebody has to take that obligation and responsibility seriously. And the simple analogy that everyone makes is then when you go into an airplane, you rely on the expertise of the pilot. You don't say, you know what, I've watched some YouTube videos and ask the pilot to leave his seat, and I'll take over, and I'm pretty sure I could do it. I've heard that all you have to do is push this button, push that button, and everything will be fine. You wouldn't do that under any conditions because you realize the pilot has expertise in flying. If you want open heart surgery, you're going to get the best surgeon. It only makes sense that if you want to talk about COVID-19, which we're talking about, obviously, you have to speak to and ask the expert epidemiologists in the world. And then you have to say, even if there's one or two opinions, you have to go by the majority of these experts or in the overwhelming consensus. To do otherwise is really to neglect your obligation and your duty. So do we have a right to force that upon you? No. You have the right to make your own decision. Is it the correct decision? That is really the ultimate question and responsibility one has for oneself. But what we have in front of us is a different situation completely. So both under secular medical ethics and Jewish medical ethics, autonomy only goes so far. If your autonomy puts in danger somebody else, then the autonomy is thrown out the window. You don't have a right to put your own life in danger if putting your own life in danger is going to cause the danger of somebody else. The example I gave the other day to someone when we're talking about limiting attendance in shul to people who are vaccinated is, would you allow someone to come into shul with a gun? Some places they do. But simply, you might say, you know what? We don't want a gun in our sanctuary. We don't want a gun in our building. It's a danger for the other congregants, the danger for all the people who are attending the services, and therefore, a gun is not allowed in our shul. Well, the same thing is true with a communicable disease. If you have a disease that you might think is harmless, but the evidence, the overwhelming evidence is that it is harmful, and in this case, the shul or the community or the government decides that is causing harm or possibly causing harm to other people, not only does the government or let's say the shul have a right to limit attendance, I understand that they have an obligation. We are responsible, as I said, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zel Lezeh. We're all responsible for each other. Lo Stamid Al Dam Reyecha. We cannot stand by when somebody else's blood is being spilled. We don't have the right to allow someone to come in and put other people in danger. And who decides that? Of course, we have the right as an institution to make that decision, but it's based on the overwhelming evidence and consensus of experts in their field that this poses a danger. And therefore, we have a responsibility and an obligation not to allow people in who could possibly cause harm. So if that is the necessity to wear a mask, and if that will cause harm if somebody is maskless or if they're not vaccinated and they pose a danger which is not necessary, then not only again do we have the right, we have the obligation. Now there is a certain point where there's acceptable risk, and that's a whole different area of both in medical ethics and halacha. We know that we're always putting ourselves in risk in daily life. When you cross the street, you're putting your life in danger. You'd certainly be safer to stay at home all day. But staying home all day is not an option for normal human activity, and that's not the way our society works. So our society in general has decided through consensus not necessarily statistically, that it's acceptable to cross the street. It's acceptable to drive a car, even though it's probably safer to take the bus or safer to fly. It's considered acceptable risk. That's true not only in daily activities, but it's also true in certain medical issues. So at a certain point, there's going to be a consensus that develops that says, you know what, wearing a mask is not necessary because it's become acceptable risk in society. What those limitations are and how they're applied is not so simple, but generally speaking, it is just consensus. And in this case, particularly, it's really hard to know where that acceptable risk is because it's culturally and subjective, and it takes time to develop this consensus. Crossing the street, everybody knows, but going without a mask when the chances of infecting someone are 0.001%, that's a question that's still open for discussion. And time will tell what's considered acceptable risk. We could only say that at this point, it doesn't seem to be there doesn't seem to be a consensus that acceptable risk allows you certain activities, whether that's wearing a mask under certain conditions or not being vaccinated. It seems to be that that's not considered acceptable risk. Will it be different in a year or two from now? Time will tell, and society, in a sense, will decide. And halacha, the Jewish law, follows the consensus developed in society to determine what is acceptable risk. So these are questions which are not simply answered and not simply applied, but certainly the Shul, for example, has the right to, and I would say, as I said before, the obligation that when it's not considered acceptable risk by most people, we certainly have the right to say this is not allowed in our building because you are putting other people at risk, and we are not going to allow it, and we cannot be responsible. We do not want to be responsible for the possible health issue or death of someone in the future because we allowed it. So again, the issues are quite complicated. What's allowed and what's not allowed, what you have permission to do and what you don't have permission to do is not a simple issue, both in secular medical ethics and in Jewish medical ethics. But I feel very confident in saying that as a shul, we have the right at this time to limit those people who are not putting the lives of other people ahead of their own desires to follow the opinion of an individual or a very small minority opinion and putting everybody else's life at risk. And therefore, that's the position our shul has taken, and I believe many shuls have taken the same position. And again, all of these issues are always going to be open for discussion on an ongoing basis, and they are complicated, and there are many people who would disagree, but it's a position which, in particular, our shul at Beth Israel feels strongly about, and I, as a rabbi, feel strongly about. And I only would wish that everybody will stay healthy and remain healthy and do whatever they have in whatever ability they have to remain healthy for the foreseeable future. Good Shabbos.